Guys, what's up? And today we are reacting to crazy things that happen to airplanes.
Mortgage meetings starting to feel like...
Okay, we have an ad. What the heck?
Aeroflot Flight 6502.
What happened to
Captain
that?
Alexander Kluyev bet his first officer he could land the aircraft blind. It was October 20th, 1986.
What?
Aeroflot Flight 6502,
What?
a Tupolev Tu-134A carrying 87 passengers
87.
and 7 crew, including 14 children, was approaching Kuibyshev Airport in the Soviet Union. Kluyev was on final descent when he made the wager.
What?
He would land the aircraft using only the instruments. No visual reference.
What the
No
heck?
looking outside. To make sure he could not cheat, he pulled the curtains across the cockpit windows. Nobody in the cockpit stopped him. Not the first officer Gennady Zhernov, not the navigator, not the flight engineer. Air traffic control had already advised him to fly a standard non-directional beacon approach. Kluyev
But first, why would he even do that? Like, that's the worst thing ever. If you fly a plane blindfolded, you're gonna crash. I think I know what's gonna happen.
brushed it off. He had something to prove that afternoon, and 94 people behind him were about to become the audience. The Tu-134A slammed into the runway 500 feet past the threshold, coming
What?
down at nearly 5 times the acceptable sink rate. The aircraft
I knew
veered
it.
off the runway, broke apart, and caught fire.
I knew
70
it.
people did not survive. 24 people, including all 14 children on board, made it out with serious injuries. First Officer Zhernov reportedly worked to help passengers evacuate the burning wreckage and suffered a heart attack. He did not survive the ride to the hospital. The KGB kept the details classified for years. Photos of the crash site were smuggled out
never
by a
done
fire
that.
department officer and did not
And
surface publicly
Me too.
until
Nobody
much
was
later.
hurt, by the way. Nobody
When the
was hurt.
trial finally happened, investigators established that the aircraft was in perfect condition. No mechanical failure, no engine issue, no control problem. Kluyev had over 8,000 flight hours on his record and a reputation for wanting to prove he was the best pilot in the room.
What
He
the?
was sentenced
Bro
to
should
15
never do
years in
that.
prison and released after 6.
You should have
A
never
landing
done
net,
that.
Curtained cockpit windows, and 3 crew members who watched their captain go through with it and did not challenge him. 70 people did not walk off that aircraft because their captain wanted to demonstrate a skill nobody had asked him to demonstrate.
Yeah.
Northwest Airlines Flight
Like,
255.
What?
The MD-82 was in the air for exactly 14 seconds. It was
14
August 16,
seconds.
1987 at 8:44 p.m. when Northwest Airlines Flight 255
Ooh,
was
I love
cleared for
Northwest.
takeoff from Detroit Metropolitan
Or
Airport.
Southwest. I
Captain
know.
John Mouse and First Officer David Dodds pushed the throttles up
Okay.
on runway 3C, bound for Phoenix with 149 passengers on board. They rotated for takeoff.
Whoa, this is flight 255.
The aircraft lifted off, and then, at approximately 50 feet above the ground, it began to roll left, then right, then left again. It struck a light pole beyond the end of the runway. The left wing tore off. The aircraft broke apart across airport property before crashing onto Middle Belt Road. 154 people did not survive. 2 more died on the ground.
150.
The one survivor was a 4-year-old girl named Cecilia Sichan, traveling home to Arizona with her parents and her 6-year-old
Arizona?
brother David. A Romulus firefighter named John Theed found her still strapped into her seat in the wreckage. She had
What?
third-degree burns, a fractured skull, a broken collarbone, and a broken leg. She was the only
What?
person on board Flight 255 who lived. The cause of the crash was not weather, not mechanical failure, not a bird strike. The flaps and slats, the moving surfaces on the wings that generate the extra
I need to tell you something. I actually used to fly planes. That's my favorite thing in the world.
lift needed for a heavy jet to leave the ground safely were fully retracted at rotation. The MD-82 attempted takeoff in a configuration that left it unable to climb safely. The crew had never run the taxi checklist. The crew had faced taxi confusion and time pressure before departure. Investigators reviewing the cockpit voice recorder found no call for the checklist and no reading of it. The flap and slat position was one of the items that would have been checked. There was a backup, an audible takeoff warning system that alarms in the cockpit if the aircraft is not properly configured for departure. On Flight 255, the warning system had no electrical power. The circuit breaker for it was in a manually disabled position. Some pilots on the MD-82 fleet were known to pull that breaker because the alarm was considered a nuisance. Investigators could not conclusively determine why the breaker was pulled on this particular aircraft on this particular day. A skipped checklist, a disabled backup warning, and 14 seconds of flight. Garuda Indonesia Flight 200. It was 6:58 a.m. in Yogyakarta, Indonesia. Garuda Indonesia Flight 200, a Boeing 737-400, was on final approach with 140 people on board.
Or
In the cockpit,
737.
Captain Muhammad Marwoto Komar,
But that's
a 21-year
777?
veteran with over 13,000 flight hours,
Yeah.
was flying the aircraft into the runway at nearly
Yeah.
double the recommended descent rate. Next to him, his young first officer was watching a landing go wrong in real time. The ground proximity warning system started shouting. Once, twice, then a third time, then a
What?
fourth. Over the course of the approach, it would sound 15 separate warnings, some of them the loudest and most urgent alerts an airliner is capable of producing.
You mean the
First
one that
Officer Gagam Saman Romana called for Komar to abort the landing and go around.
Oh, Indonesian
Komar
flight
refused.
200.
Romana called again. Komar refused again. The airspeed was now 87 knots above normal touchdown
what-
speed. The 7-3
I know what knots means. I can't really explain much about it, but I don't simply explain much about it. But knots is like mile per hour. It's like miles per hour. But planes and ships use it.
7 was shaking so violently under Romana that he later reported blacking out in his seat before the wheels ever touched the ground. Komar was not correcting. He was not slowing down. He was going to put this aircraft on the ground his way, and every warning system on board and every voice in the cockpit was screaming at him to stop. The 737 slammed
Not-
onto the runway
Okay, I'm not playing
2,820 feet past
Okay,
the
guys,
threshold
no more
at
pausing the video.
221 knots. The nose gear collapsed on impact. The
No more
aircraft
pausing
tore
this.
straight off the end of the runway, ripped through a perimeter fence, crossed a public road,
that-
and came to
no.
rest in a rice paddy where it burst
I
into
mean,
flames.
a bunch of
21 people did not
won't survive
survive.
that, right?
20 passengers and 1 flight attendant. Most of the fatalities were caused by the post-crash fire, not the impact itself. Both pilots walked away. Captain Komar was arrested and charged with 6 counts of manslaughter. Investigators found no mechanical failure
I never
that
crashed a
explained the
plane in my
crash.
life.
The decisive problem was the unstable approach and the crew's failure to go around.
Never.
He was convicted of negligence and sentenced to 2 years in prison in 2009. Later that year, Indonesia's High Court overturned the
It used to
conviction.
be-
15
I
warnings,
think when I
2
used to
go-around
be
calls from
Arizona-
his own first officer, a functioning aircraft and clear weather, and a
What?
captain who decided he was going to land this one his way. Southern Airways Flight 242.
Hey,
Captain
you
Bill
should not-
McKenzie had a decision to make. He was descending through about 17,000 feet over Georgia on the afternoon of April 1977, cruising in a Southern Airways DC-9 with 85 people on board on the short hop
What if
from
most
Huntsville to
like-
Atlanta. His weather radar was showing a wall of red cells directly across his flight path. Between 2 of those cells, in what appeared to be a gap of clear air, was a narrow path he could take. Air traffic control had already warned him about heavy precipitation ahead. Mackenzie decided the gap looked flyable. What
Yeah.
Mackenzie did not fully understand was that the radar picture could hide the worst part of a storm behind heavy rainfall. The clear path between the 2 thunderstorms was not clear. It was a severe thunderstorm cell inside a wider outbreak that was producing destructive weather across the region,
That looks like a
hidden from the
tornado.
radar by the wall of rain in front of it. Around 20 tornadoes touched down across Alabama and Georgia that same day.
No!
Mackenzie flew into it. The moment the DC-9 entered the cell, hail the size of golf balls shattered the cockpit windshield. Both engines ingested
Right.
water and ice faster than they could combust it. Within seconds, both engines flamed out. The aircraft was now a 90,000-pound glider descending through one of the worst storm systems to hit the region that year,
glider?
with no power, no working windshield, and no airport within reach. First Officer Lyman Keel took the controls. He was looking for anywhere to put it down. A road, a field, anything. He found a narrow 2-lane highway called Georgia Route 92 Spur running through the small town of New Hope. He aimed for it. The DC-9 touched down on the asphalt, but immediately started clipping trees and power poles with its wings. The aircraft skidded 1,830 feet down the road, hit a gas station, exploded, and broke apart. 63 people on the aircraft did not survive. 9 people on the ground did not survive. Both pilots were among the dead. The NTSB's final report noted that the storm was survivable if it had been avoided. One of the 4 board members filed a dissent making the point more directly. He argued that the captain's decision to continue into severe weather was the central failure. Mackenzie had over 19,000 hours of flight experience.
Cool.
Every one of them ended with the choice he made about that gap in the radar picture.
What?
Gulf Air Flight 072. Captain Ihsan Shakib had 86 hours of experience commanding an
not a
Airbus
captain.
A320.
Uh-oh.
Not thousands, just 86. He had been promoted to A320 captain earlier that year, and his
Airbus
own training
A320.
records showed a low pass on 2 separate emergency procedures during his check ride.
I think I know this.
Sitting next to him that night was First Officer Khalaf Al-Alawi, age 25, with only 608 flight hours in his entire career. Al-Alawi had failed his initial A320 proficiency check the year before. Between them, they had very limited experience operating together in the roles they were now filling. It was August 23rd, 2000. Gulf Air Flight 072 was approaching Bahrain International Airport at night with 143 people on board at the end of a 2-hour flight from Cairo. The approach was unstable from the moment they lined up. The aircraft was descending at 223 knots instead of the standard 136. It was 162 feet above the correct altitude. The flaps were still in position 1 when they should have been at full landing configuration. Standard procedure at this point was a go-around, a climb-out, and a second try. Shakib chose to keep going. At 600 feet above the water, less than a nautical mile from the runway threshold, he requested permission from air traffic control to fly a left orbit, a tight circle at low altitude, at night, over water,